Ayn Rand has lived one of the most remarkable lives of the 20th century.
She is probably one of the most intense, outspoken, perhaps one of the most intellectual voices in America today.
Miss Rand's point of view is still comparatively unknown in America, but if it ever did take hold, it would revolutionize our lives.
You mention this woman's name and you're in for a very vigorous conversation.
I think you will find her most unusual and most controversial. Would you welcome, please, Miss Ayn Rand.
At a sales conference at Random House, preceding the publication of Atlas Shrugged, one of the book salesmen asked me whether I could present the essence of my philosophy while standing on one foot. I did, as follows. 1. Metaphysics, objective reality. 2. Epistemology, reason. 3. Ethics, self-interest. 4. Politics, capitalism. If you want this translated into simple language, it would read, 1. Nature to be commanded must be obeyed, or wishing won't make it so. 2. You can't eat your cake and have it too. 3. Man is an end in himself. 4. Give me liberty or give me death. If you held these concepts with total consistency as the base of your convictions, you would have a full philosophical system to guide the course of your life.
If there's one thing I've learned from computer science, it's that simplicity is deceptive. Even a simple set of rules has the potential to create immense complexity. Objectivism has a simple structure, but when you reflect on these conceptual relationships, they will spread to progressively deeper levels. There is something true about objectivism. 40 years after Rand's death, there are objectivist scholars who are actively developing and promoting it. The mission of an objectivist is crystal clear, because objectivism is their way of life.
So think about this talk as emphasizing how objectivism is radical, but radically different. We take philosophy seriously. Everything that shapes our positions on issues, our lives, is grounded in a philosophical understanding of the world, in a philosophical approach to life and to issues. Nobody else out there in the world takes philosophy seriously like we do. So we don't just have positions. We have positions grounded in fundamental ideas, in philosophical ideas. And that is extremely unique because nobody out there, including on the left and in the middle and on the right, they don't have a system of philosophy.
Ayn Rand with objectivism gave me a complete framework on how to think about who I am, what I am, and then how to apply myself in the world. Before that, for 40 years, I was a kid with a lot of potential. And they did great things. I was successful in many ways, but I never had the framework that led me to where I am today, which is I consider myself a highly happy person.
Who was Ayn Rand?
Ayn Rand was a novelist, a philosopher, arch champion of reason. Her famous novels are Atlas Shrugged and The Fountainhead, and her philosophy is a defense of reason and individualism.
You met her when you were just a kid, so to speak.
17.
Tell us how that happened.
Through a mutual friend. I was a teenager. I was in pre-med. I was visiting California, and I wangled an invitation to her home, and I asked her a couple of philosophic questions, and she gave me overwhelming answers, completely blew me away. Everyone I had ever met before her thought that philosophy was a matter of opinion, and there were no answers, and she gave straightforward, detailed 20-minute-long answers that not only answered the question, but that finished with the mistakes I had made in my thinking that caused me to ask it and not to know the answer myself. I was on the floor at the end of that.
Since people are living by the principles of objectivism, then any criticism of those principles, or of Ayn Rand herself, can be taken personally. But if there's one thing that objectivists insist on, it's that their views are consistent and open to discussion. They're confident that what they believe is true and therefore defensible.
Why do people need philosophy?
Because they're alive, they're human, they have a rational faculty, they can't escape it. You can escape astrophysics and never have a thought on it in your entire life. You cannot escape philosophy because implicitly, or if not explicitly, you have some kind of values, some idea of what you're after, what's good or bad, what's desirable or undesirable. That's ethics. And you have some idea what you will take as reliable knowledge, what counts as true and what is just nonsense or absurd. And that's epistemology. That's the branch of philosophy which tells you how to acquire reliable knowledge.
Objectivism accounts for facts and values, meaning that it explains what is true and how to act on that basis. Now, facts are typically boring, but values are exciting. And that's why most of Rand's public interviews went like this.
You say that you do not like the altruism by which we live. You like a certain kind of Ayn Randist selfishness.
I would say that I don't like is too weak a word. I consider it evil. And self-sacrifice is the precept that man needs to serve others in order to justify his existence, that his moral duty is to serve others. That is what most people believe today.
Well, yes, we're taught to feel concerned for our fellow man, to feel responsible for his welfare, to feel that we are, as religious people might put it, children under God and responsible one for the other. Now, why do you rebel? What's wrong with this philosophy?
But that is what, in fact, makes man a sacrificial animal. That man must work for others, concern himself with others, or be responsible for them. That is the role of a sacrificial object. I say that man is entitled to his own happiness and that he must achieve it himself, but that he cannot demand that others give up their lives to make him happy.
Your view is then if we all became more comfortable with our natural tendencies, that is to say, selfishness, there would be less horror, less war, less Hitler?
There wouldn't be any.
So the more selfish we are, the more kind, the more tranquil and peaceful the world in which we live?
And more benevolent toward other people, if we're rationally selfish.
I was one of those people who belonged to your cult where we were devouring your books, and I just wanted to say that as I matured, I am glad that I was able to differentiate with your philosophies.
Did you see our show last year? Do you want to create an incident?
No.
Pass it up. I'm not a cult.
Okay. The question is not whether Rand's ethics and politics are justified, it's whether the inference she makes from facts to values is justified. And sure enough, a good objectivist will have an answer for you.
The proof of the objectivist ethics is inductive. In other words, it's about looking at the facts and gathering the kinds of observations and integrating them in the kind of way that Rand thinks that you ought to. The proof is not deductive, it's inductive. In other words, the proof consists in generalizing from your observations about reality. I mean, that's how Ayn Rand came to form the theory.
Induction starts from particular observations and ends with universal principles, giving us objective knowledge, which we then apply to ethics and politics. This is why objectivists are confident that their values are grounded in reality. Now, if this holds true, then objectivism is nothing short of a breakthrough in our understanding of induction. The perennial problem with induction has always been its circularity. We can only check observations against other observations, meaning that the only justification for an induction is another induction. In order to justify itself as objective, Rand's epistemology must solve this problem.
On the basis of sensory observation, human beings have the unique capacity to form concepts or abstractions And Ayn Rand's book, Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, is entirely devoted to how to form concepts. And she holds that concepts are also objective. In other words, they are not a product of the arbitrary decree of society, and they are not a revelation from God, as, for instance, Plato and his Christian followers later held. Concepts are our way of organizing sensory data, but they are an objective way, and there are definite rules of forming them, and therefore when you use them properly, you can claim to have objective knowledge.
Objectivism deals with the problem of induction by explaining how concepts are formed. Concepts are referred to as green lights for induction.
A concept is a generalizing mechanism. This is Ayn Rand's theory of concepts, that a concept is like a file folder, she says. You put knowledge into it because you intend to apply it to future cases. So having a concept, having the right concept, Dr. Peikoff calls a green light to induction. It's set up to do an induction.
Not every concept is a green light for induction. They have to be formed properly.
But now to use them properly, you have to put them together using logic. Logic is the method of reason. Logic, of course, was invented by Aristotle, not by objectivism, but we subscribe entirely to Aristotelian logic, the essence of which is you can't have your cake and eat it too. Nothing can be A and non-A at the same time and in the same respect. That's the essence of logical thinking, to put the data together in a way without contradictions. And why can't you have contradictions? Because we're trying to know reality, and the basic principle of reality is A is A. There is no contradictions in reality.
In order for a concept to confirm an induction, it has to be formed according to the rules of logic. Peikoff referred to Aristotelian logic, but these are known more widely as the laws of classical logic: identity, non-contradiction, and excluded middle. Harry Binswanger describes these as everything is something, a thing can't be everything, and a thing can't be nothing. Logic in objectivism is grounded metaphysically in objective reality. For example, the law of non-contradiction is true because there is no such thing as a real contradiction. And remember that objectivism is consistent, so if contradictions don't exist metaphysically, they don't exist epistemologically, ethically, or politically. These laws are not mere conjectures for an objectivist. They are necessary conditions of rationality, and therefore essential to their way of life.
We're going after you. We're going after the intellectual, after the principled, after the people who really are intolerant of contradictions. That's the way I think about our audience.
Our minds can't have contradictory ideas. Not shouldn't, our minds cannot have contradictory ideas.
Classical logic is a metaphysical absolute in objectivism. It is absolutely necessary. But is it also sufficient for concept formation?
She has a book called Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology, which I encourage any scientist, mathematician, anybody interested in science to read. And she has a theory of concepts that is completely new, that is completely revolutionary, and I think is essential for the philosophy of science.
Now, the laws of classical logic are not particularly new or revolutionary, so while they are necessary, they are not sufficient for concept formation. There must be something else involved, something that makes it more than just a logical theory.
Mathematics is in trouble. The problem of universals is solved by recognizing that universals are man-made, but man-made on the basis of objective, almost mathematical facts. Yeah.
So you said that the way in which specific concretes differ along a CCD is almost mathematical. I seem to remember it being said in that it is mathematical, and if it is in fact mathematical, can you explain exactly what that means? It's hard for me to imagine a sort of quantity inherent in the blueness of my shirt or the degree of my rationality. Is there a quantity there?
Yeah.
There is.
The first thing is what is really mathematics here and what isn't? First of all, I don't exactly know.
This answer is unacceptable, especially coming from the author of a book called How We Know. But it's not Harry's fault that he doesn't know the answer to this critical question. It's Ayn Rand's fault.
She had a theory that she only hinted at, that concept formation and mathematics were really the same in some way.
She actually saw a lot of parallels between math and concept formation. Mm-hmm. And she was actually, in the years before she died, she was taking private lessons in mathematics, in algebra, and calculus, because she believed that there was real insight in understanding algebra and calculus to philosophy, into epistemology.
Yes, I see objectivism as moving in two directions in terms of new material. But obviously, don't ask me to give you this material because I didn't hear you. I think the most pregnant theoretical direction is the one Ayn Rand indicated in her final years, the integration of mathematics and conceptualization. That's the track she was working on, of which Introduction to Objectivist Epistemology was merely the first indication. She frequently said that the parallels between concept formation and mathematics that she indicated in that book were just to scratch the surface, and that she had in mind a much more extensive integration which would throw tremendous light on the formation of propositions, theory formation, the whole problem of induction. She only left very fragmentary leads, but that, to me, is the most profitable field to pursue if someone knows how.
The connection between mathematics and concept formation is an open question in objectivism. There's no doubt that mathematical concepts help us to understand concepts in general, which is what Rand wrote about. Classical logic makes objectivism consistent, but until concept formation is formalized mathematically, the entire system remains incomplete.
I don't know if you're familiar with Gale's incompleteness theorem.
I'm not, unfortunately.
Okay. I have this intuition that there is something different between mathematics and philosophy that I'd love to hear from people. Like, what exactly is that difference? Because there's a precision to mathematics that philosophy doesn't have, but that precision gets you in trouble. It actually takes you away from truth. Like the very constraints of the language used in mathematics actually puts a constraint on the capture of truth that it's able to do.
So I'm going to argue that is a total product of the way you're conceptualizing the terms within mathematics. It's not in reality.
Objectivists need to understand incompleteness because it's the source of their confusion about mathematics. Rand's epistemology is an unfulfilled promise that someday, inevitably, the true mathematical model for concept formation will be found, solving the problem of induction once and for all.
I believe that I mentioned there Ayn Rand's unfinished work. I think that what she would have done if she had lived long enough is use mathematics, higher mathematics, to solve the problem of induction. This is, as far as I can make out, the direction of the next genius, whenever he's born, has to follow to build on her leads.
In Ayn Rand's journals, we find the following statement. My hypothesis is that all consciousness is a mathematical process, or rather the function of any consciousness is a mathematical process. This is the main idea of what I'm calling Ayn Rand's math hypothesis. It's unambiguous. The function of consciousness is a mathematical process, not almost, not in large part, it is. But it's also hypothetical. She has no proof. Still, her hunch is based on two claims from her book on epistemology: concepts are made of units, and conceptuality is the algebra of cognition. These are not hypotheses, they are knowledge claims, and if they turn out to be true, then they lend support to the main idea. It's clear why objectivists are optimistic about the math hypothesis, because there is a real connection between math and concept formation. But what they're missing is that Rand's hypothesis threatens the metaphysical foundation of her logic. This is a real problem because her epistemology seems to be aimed directly at the math hypothesis, as if all its concepts and principles are evidence of its truth. In order to resolve this problem, I offer you the Objectivist Space Program. Back when I was a philosophy student, I was presenting an original theory of mine to my classmates. It was something about Wittgenstein's private language argument. Afterwards, I was answering questions, and someone exposed a contradiction in my account. I recall feeling embarrassed, like I'd made some kind of rookie mistake, but my professor just smiled. Contradictions are a natural feature of human reasoning. When we're pushing our minds to their absolute limits, a contradiction is not a mistake. It means that we've reached a psychological point of interest. Now, it might only be interesting to you, the person who's thinking, but if you invest your time thinking at the highest levels of abstraction, it is possible to make the limits of your thinking objectively interesting. Take Immanuel Kant. His distinction between phenomena and noumena was applied to human understanding universally, meaning that the categories of our understanding only apply to phenomena, not to noumena. But when you read the Critique of Pure Reason, you'll find statements that apply the categories to noumenal objects. Kant was aware of this contradiction and tried to resolve it in the second edition of the Critique, but the point is not that his system is false, or inherently evil, as Ayn Rand thought. Rather, it teaches us how thinking works at this particular conceptual limit, the problems it encounters, and the ideas that it generates. The value of Kant's philosophy is that it demonstrates an objective contradiction, which everyone can learn from. As Graham Priest put it, Kant is caught squarely in the contradiction inherent in the limits of thought, a contradiction which is occasioned by the very objects of the theory. Ayn Rand described objectivism as a philosophy for life on Earth. So, let's say that the limits of objectivism are like the limits of Earth's atmosphere. We know we've reached this limit when a human can no longer survive, or we encounter a contradiction. I'm saying that we should approach this intellectual limit like we do the physical one, as a puzzle to be solved with the best science and technology at our disposal. Classical logic is just one form of technology in this scenario, and it has its uses, but it's not sufficient to sustain objectivity at the limits of conceptualization. To understand why, read Logic Comics. It's an accessible and beautiful introduction to classical logic that highlights the revelation of Gödel's theorem in its historical context. It will also emphasize the strengths of objectivism as a system that takes philosophy seriously, and can therefore produce new and revolutionary insights. Take, for example, the supporting claims of Rand's math hypothesis, that concepts are made of units, and that conceptuality is the algebra of cognition. I believe we can prove these claims to be true. The required textbook is Greek Mathematical Thought and the Origin of Algebra. The author, Jacob Klein, was born in Russia, studied in Germany under Heidegger, and then moved to America. The first half of this book explains the real difference between Plato and Aristotle on the nature of mathematical objects, and the second half connects that difference to the absorption of algebra in early modern Europe. Once again, if the supporting claims of Rand's math hypothesis are true, then the main idea becomes highly plausible. But in order to explore this idea directly, we must go beyond the limits of objectivism, with the help of an outside perspective that we can sink our intellectual teeth into. What we need is a conjecture.
You have been called the greatest living genius. You have been called the Leonardo da Vinci of our time, the Benjamin Franklin of the space age, and you've also been called a crackpot. How would you describe yourself?
As a very average human being.
Buckminster Fuller, the man you just heard from, is an engineer, inventor, mathematician, and philosopher.
He has been called a visionary, a prophet, a genius. Mr. Fuller, of all of the people that I have interviewed, you are the most difficult to define. You called yourself a random element. Other people have called you an experience.
An author, a designer, a scientist. He's even a cosmogonist, which I neither know how to spell nor do I know what it is.
A New World thinker, if there ever was one, or Buckminster Fuller.
One of the most important things in my commitment was that I would never become the head of a cult.
There's a phenomenon in history where a single discovery is made independently by two separate people. The lifespans of Ayn Rand and Buckminster Fuller overlap almost perfectly. They spent their lives in major American cities, and they were both married only once and stayed that way until they died. Rand mentioned Fuller in her book The New Left, calling him a bright young man of 75. You might recognize Fuller's signature design, the geodesic dome. Most people don't know that the dome's geometry is based on a comprehensive philosophical system, synergetics. Like objectivism, it comprises its own set of facts and values, and promises a solution to the problem of induction. But instead of forming its concepts using classical logic, Fuller used mathematics. Synergetics is conceptualized geometry, which is expressed in language that is both physical and metaphysical.
When you say, I'm going to think about that, you're immediately separating something out from the rest of your experience. That you're thinking about. And in doing so, all the that's, all the think aboutables are systems. And there may be you as a system, or it might be our Earth as a system. And it's a characteristic of systems that they subdivide the universe, and all the universe is outside the system, and all the universe inside the system, a little bit of the universe which is the system itself. Okay? Anybody find anything wrong with that? The system divides the universe, and all the universe is not in the system, outside the system, and all the universe is inside the system, and a little bit of the universe which is the system itself, which divides the universe in the insideness and outsideness. This is what all your thoughts will be, and you try to say, I understand something. You want the connections between the different points of that thing. And it'll turn out to be, it's polyhedral, it does have the insideness and outsideness.
Let's make a few things clear. First, Buckminster Fuller is an enigma. We're still trying to nail him down, or get him into a corner, as he might have said. The Buckminster Fuller Institute has been around for more than 40 years, but they've made little progress on the system of synergetics itself. It's fallen to independent scholars like myself and others to determine its objective significance. Which brings me to point 2. Synergetics is the work of an individual. Fuller meets the criteria for one of Rand's heroes, men like Howard Rourke in The Fountainhead or John Galt in Atlas Shrugged. Not only was Fuller an architect and inventor, he sought to base his knowledge on nothing other than his own experience. He was well read in the sciences and referred to men like Einstein and Kepler, but rarely mentioned philosophers. Fuller intentionally removed himself from the Western tradition in order to start from his own first principles. The subtitle of Synergetics is The Geometry of Thinking. Now, if concept formation is a mathematical process, then geometry is our means of modeling it. Fuller described it as epistemography, the study of graphing knowledge. So even though Fuller's language is highly interpretive, his models are highly objective. They constitute their own branch of geometry and can be studied as such. But the question is whether this geometry can accurately model concept formation in a way that is also consistent with what we know from objectivism. To this end, synergetics gives us a clear and distinct conjecture for the minimum unit of concept formation.
So here we have tetrahedron. And because each of those are half quantum, this must be one quantum. In other words, one quantum would be 6 vectors. Tetrahedron is a system because it has insiderness and outsideness, and consists of triangles, therefore its structure. So this is then the minimum structural system. And we have a visualizable fundamental of our physics. Physics does not require such visual models, conceptual models. But I find there is conceptuality here.
In her epistemology, Rand referred to measurement omission as a kind of mechanism for cognition and concept formation. Her argument is subtle because measurements omitted does not mean that measurements are regarded as non-existent. It means that measurements exist but are not specified. That measurements must exist is an essential part of the process. In synergetics, this mechanism is referred to as conceptuality independent of size.
An angle is an angle independent of the length of its edges. Therefore, a triangle consisting of three angles. A triangle is a triangle independent of size. Tetrahedron is a tetrahedron independent of size. Here we have conceptuality independent of size. It's a very important matter. But I have then, this is the minimum structural system. So what I take out of any seeming infinite plane to make it a structural, conceptual system and understandable is always one finite tetrahedron, or one unit of quantum. So I simply say to you that the local conceptual set plus one finite tetrahedron, and there's your universe.
Objectivists define mathematics as the science of measurement, which is to say the science of forming quantitative relationships between things. Now, the nature of discovery is to form a quantitative relationship between one thing that is measurable and another thing that isn't. This sounds like a contradiction, because how can you form a quantitative relationship with something that isn't measurable? However, if conceptuality itself is inherently quantitative, and we have a concept of that which cannot be measured, then we find ourselves with an objective contradiction, measuring the unmeasurable. It's like an M.C. Escher staircase. It can never exist in reality, even though both sets of stairs are consistent in their own terms. This models something true about concept formation that is essentially mathematical, yet undermines the metaphysical foundation of classical logic. I believe that Ayn Rand knew this, and did her best to articulate it within the philosophical system that she had already developed. Fuller's system was developed explicitly for this purpose, to walk on both sides of the staircase, with one foot in the measurable and the other in the mysterious.
I think possibly the most mysterious of all the mysteries is the regularity we find once we begin to make any measurements. There they are. And the regularities go on and on and on. There's complete integrity of the regularities within the discoverable. Now, having discovered then that physically that we don't have any continuums, we only have local energy events, really all the events themselves, and they get to be found beautiful regularities once we discover the event, and then within them we find beautiful regularities. But each one of them is surrounded by mystery. So we are permeated, we're surrounded by, we're permeated, we're bathed in mystery. The beginnings of science are absolute mystery.
There is something true about objectivism. Most people find this out for themselves by reading Rand's novels. Her characters demonstrate the practical integrity of her system. Fuller didn't write novels, but he did write poetry. The integrity of his system is shown by creating words, playing with concepts, and then modeling those concepts with the forms of geometry. Rand and Fuller are in complete agreement with regards to the state of human affairs. Rand foresaw a return to the Dark Ages if rational morality were to be conquered by fear and force, while Fuller warned that humanity will destroy itself if it fails to achieve global cooperation. I see no genuine conflict between their respective inferences from facts to values, and I believe their systems will be stronger together. My criticism of objectivism is that it hasn't contributed anything substantial to our understanding of induction. It only clarifies the problem of induction in terms of concept formation. Now that's still worth something, but it's not exactly a revolutionary achievement. But if objectivism could prove that concept formation is a mathematical process, well then it would tell us something important about induction. And the way to do that is by launching the Objectivist Space Program. Understanding the limits of classical logic, proving Rand's supporting claims in her math hypothesis, and then studying synergetics as a conjecture for its main idea.